Welcome to Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator. Just a reminder that you can keep up to date with everything Fashion And by following at Fashion And with Scott Schiavone on Instagram and by hitting that subscribe button. This episode is dedicated to one of the greatest fashion magazine editors of all time. This is Fashion and Diana Vreeland. Before Anna Wintour, there was Diana Vreeland. Diana Vreeland ruled over the fashion world for over 50 years. Magazine editor extraordinaire, during the 1960s, Diana Vreeland redefined the pages of American Vogue and fashion magazines at large. She created the cult of the celebrity fashion editor, and her vision changed the way fashion was perceived. Vreeland used the pages of magazines to communicate to her audience her love of the Bazaar and the absurd, advocating the mix of high and low fashion and blending couture with what was happening on the streets. Diana Vreeland adored the young, embraced their idiosyncrasies, endorsed their style and coined the term youthquake to describe the new movements and trends in fashion and the people who instigated them. She created the modern fashion magazine and also transformed the world of fashion in museums through her tenure at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute. Known for her outrageous opinions and irreverent, passionate, creative and flamboyant personality, Diana Vreeland was the Empress of Fashion. In this episode, we'll be exploring the life of Diana Vreeland through 5 themes: Becoming Mrs. Vreeland, Why Don't You?, The Vogue Years, Queen at the Met, and Divi's Legacy. Diana Vreeland said, "There's only one very good life, and that's the life you know you want, and you make it yourself." Born into a family of privilege, Diana Vreeland was born in Paris on the 29th of September 1903. At the outbreak of World War I, in 1914, Diana and her family moved from Paris to New York, where the family became prominent figures in New York high society. Diana joined a dancing school and became a student of Russian choreographer Mikhail Fokin and performed in Anna Pavlova's Gavotte at Carnegie Hall. Her family was so famous in the American social circle that, in January 1922, Diana was featured by Vogue magazine in a roundup of socialites and their cars. The story read, "Such motors as these accelerate the social world. Miss Diana Vreeland, one of the most attractive debutantes of the winter, is shown entering her Cadillac." On the 1st of March 1924, Diana married American banker Thomas Reed Vreeland and had 2 sons, before moving to London in 1929, where she danced with the Tiller Girls and became lifelong friends with Cecil Beaton. Diana set up a lingerie business on Berkeley Square, supplying underwear to an exclusive clientele which included Wallis Simpson. Diana often visited Paris, where she would buy her clothes, mostly from Chanel. A Chanel suit of Diana's is part of the permanent display in the costume gallery at the V&A in London. Diana was one of 15 American women presented to King George V and Queen Mary at Buckingham Palace on the 18th of May 1933. In 1935, Diana Vreeland and her family moved back to New York, where soon after her publishing career started with Harper's Bazaar as a columnist in 1936. Diana said, "Before I went to work for Harper's Bazaar in 1936, I had been leading a wonderful life in Europe. That meant travelling, seeing beautiful places, having marvellous summers, studying and reading a great deal of the time." Carmel Snow, then editor of Harper's Bazaar, had heard about Diana Vreeland from her friend Wallis Simpson. Snow was impressed with the way Diana dressed and asked her to come to work for her at Harper's Bazaar, where she soon became a fashion editor. Diana said, "I had never thought of working, and the only thing I knew was where to go to have my clothes made, so it seemed only natural to go into fashion." In the summer of 1936, Harper's Bazaar and Diana Vreeland launched the now legendary Why Don't You column, where Diana penned advice and extravagant ideas for the modern woman. In this column, Diana floated whimsical, eccentric style ideas that were at best to be enjoyed as concepts, not as lifestyle choices. Vreeland's extravagant and outrageous advice included: why don't you wash your child's hair in champagne? Why don't you bring back from Europe a huge white Baroque porcelain stove to stand in your front hall? Why don't you have your bed made in China? Why don't you find a dress that you like and have it copied many times? You will be much more successful than if you try to produce the same effects each evening. The overstated opulence of Vreeland's advice was hard to execute, elaborate and expensive to many actual readers, and to put them into action would have required vast amounts of wealth. Instead, the column offered a sense of playfulness. Vreeland herself described the column as just ideas. It was me insisting on people using their imaginations, insisting on a certain idea of luxury. Vreeland imagined for her readers a life where you can find the resources to be stylishly eccentric and frivolous. It was enough just to imagine them. It was during her time at Harper's Bazaar that Diana Vreeland discovered actress Lauren Bacall, formed a close working relationship with Richard Avedon, and advised First Lady Jackie Kennedy in matters of style, introducing her to designer Oleg Cassini. When Carmel Snow retired in 1958, Diana Vreeland hoped to assume the position of editor-in-chief. However, Snow had apparently advised that Vreeland did not have the discipline for the job, and the position went to Snow's niece, Nancy White. Vreeland stayed around for a few years, but eventually left for Harper's Bazaar's greatest rival, Vogue magazine. From the moment she came to Vogue, she created a revolution. She was the most talented editor of her period because she was able to stamp an era in the reader's mind. It was Alexander Lieberman who approached Diana Vreeland and offered her a position at Vogue. According to her autobiography DV, Vreeland stated that Vogue offered me a very large salary, an endless expense account, and Europe whenever I wanted to go. That's what hooked me. Diana Vreeland joined Vogue as associate editor in 1962. However, her exhaustible energy and innovative ideas soon led to her promotion to editor-in-chief. The 1960s was a unique decade. On one hand, it signalled a move away from haute couture, and on the other was a radical rupture with prevailing trends in which youth was the driving force and source of inspiration. Before Diana Vreeland, the pages of Vogue were dictated by haute couture, and magazines were limited to presenting the clothes, not interpreting them or changing them to create a visual story. Vreeland changed all this, repeating to her editors, "Fashion is a show, not a service." She would often say, "Give the readers what they never knew they wanted." Diana Vreeland, Vogue magazine and the 1960s were made for each other. I don't think anyone else has ever been in a better place at a better time than I was when I was editor of Vogue. Vreeland intended to position Vogue at the forefront of fashion journalism. She developed a formula for the magazine that was based on her own extravagant personality, supported by a troupe of editorial staff. Vogue under Vreeland influenced more than ever. New locations, new styles and new photographers called for new faces. She brought in 16-year-old Twiggy and 17-year-old Penelope Tree, both with a waif-like look that became the new standard for the decade. She had a very particular view of photography and how it should be used in the magazine. With gorgeous models such as Verushka and photographers like Richard Avedon, Vreeland created some of the most famous editorial images in fashion history. She insisted on fashion shoots and productions in the most exotic and remote places: India, Japan, Turkey, Tahiti and the Libyan desert or the glaciers of Greenland. Her eccentricities knew no limitations, and everything that happened at Vogue during the 1960s revolved around the participation, the direction and the whimsy of Diana Vreeland. Truman Capote, one of her closest friends, said, "She is the kind of genius that very few people will ever recognise because you have to be a genius yourself to recognise it. Otherwise, you just think she's a rather foolish woman." People who worked at Vogue said she acted more like an empress than an editor, and her quest for perfection generated crisis of logistics, budget overruns, frayed tempers, tears, desertions, and 15-hour working days. By the early 1970s, worldwide economic recession was affecting advertisers, fashion houses, and magazines alike. Suddenly, everything that was invigorating about Vreeland's Vogue in the 1960s collapsed. The extravagant clothes ceased to appeal, painted face makeup became passé, and far-flung locations for photo shoots became too expensive. During her 8 years at Vogue, women too had changed in both their personal and professional lives, and the magazine, as a mirror of society, had to change with them. The board had become upset at her extravagance, the magazine was losing advertisers, and circulation was dropping. In the spring of 1971, Diana Vreeland was fired. In 1973, Diana Vreeland joined the Metropolitan Museum of Art as special consultant to the Costume Institute. Before the appointment of Diana Vreeland, the field of fashion curation within museums had been a relatively sleepy one. There was a dullness and an aura of antiquarianism that shrouded every costume display, and exhibitions had, for all intents and purposes, no audience beyond a few dress and fashion history specialists. Almost immediately, Diana Vreeland injected her unique sensibilities into the field. Her first exhibition, The World of Balenciaga, attracted 150,000 visitors, and boom, the blockbuster fashion exhibition was born. Her approach to exhibitions reflected her past as a fashion editor. Curators questioned her academic expertise and approach to interpreting objects and periods of history, but through the alchemy of her incredible eye, the dreariest group of historical costumes could be transformed into the liveliest vignettes. Diana Vreeland can most definitely be credited as one of the people responsible for changing the entire field of fashion within the museum. Her approach to exhibition making gave curators a newfound freedom to apply a new virtuosity to their displays without incurring the harsh criticism of others within the field. In 1972, Diana Vreeland transformed the Met Gala from a small dinner party fundraiser into one of the most important nights on the New York social calendar. And it was at her insistence that invitations were mailed out to celebrities including Andy Warhol, Bianca Jagger, Diana Ross and Cher. Under Vreeland's direction, the Met Gala began to resemble the event that we know and love today. Guests would arrive decked out in the most glamorous of clothes, and perfume was pumped into the gallery around them. It was pure sartorial theatre. Back then, tickets were still made available to those who weren't at the top of high society, which meant that a wide variety of fashion industry personnel and even students could afford to attend the Met Gala. By 1984, Diana Vreeland had organised 12 exhibitions, including Romantic and Glamorous Hollywood Design in 1974, The 18th Century Woman in 1981, and Yves Saint Laurent 25 Years of Style in 1983, the first exhibition of its kind ever dedicated to a living designer. About 4 years before her death, Diana Vreeland withdrew from society. In 1989, at the age of 85, Diana Vreeland died of a heart attack at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York. Diana Vreeland has remained a touchstone in fashion and has been the subject of many books, characterised in films and cited by designers as a source of inspiration. Those who received the full force of her influence speak of Diana Vreeland as a kind of prophet, a philosopher whose subject happened to be style. Fashion legend Andre Leon Talley and curator Harold Koda have credited Diana Vreeland as being instrumental in their success. the outrageous character of the fashion editor in the movie Who Are You, Polly Magoo, is said to be based on Vreeland, as is the character of fashion editor Maggie Prescott in the film Funny Face. Just think pink.
Think pink. Think pink when you shop for summer clothes. Think pink. Think pink if you want that Kelka shows.
Marc Jacobs cited Diana Vreeland as the inspiration for his Autumn-Winter 2015 collection and runway set, which was a reproduction of the famous living room Vreeland called A Garden in Hell. In 2012, a documentary film based on her life, time spent in Europe, and her pioneering career in the fashion industry entitled Diana Vreeland, The Eye Has to Travel, was released. A must-see, I highly recommend it. Vreeland's cult of personality also lives on in a collection of fragrances. Diana Vreeland Perfumes launched in September 2014 with 6 scents and has had more added since. Fragrance names include Empress of Fashion, obviously, Smashingly Brilliant, Vivaciously Bold and Daringly Different, a host of names that truly describe the legendary Mrs. Vreeland. And of course, Diana Vreeland's legendary autobiography, DV, written in 1984 and opening with the immortal line, "I loathe nostalgia," remains one of my favourite fashion biographies of all time. Whether the extravagant stories recounted by Mrs. Vreeland are fact or fiction.
This book has been sort of a Bible for me, and, well, here. And I should read this? Oh, hon, you should commit sections to memory.
Honey, you should commit sections to memory. Diana Vreeland ruled over the fashion world for over 50 years. She was the first editor to become a celebrity in her own right, and her vision for Vogue changed the way fashion was perceived. She was an advocate for high and low fashion, mixing couture designers with what was happening on the streets, and she used the pages of magazines to communicate to her audience her love of the bizarre and the absurd. Before Anna Wintour, Diana Vreeland changed what it meant to be a fashion editor. She said, "Fashion is part of the daily air and it changes all the time with all the events. You can even see the approaching of a revolution in clothes. You can see and feel everything in clothes." Throughout her lifetime, she was indeed the Empress of Fashion. Well, that's it for the extraordinary life and vision of fashion and Diana Vreeland. I'll see you next time, but before you go, don't forget to subscribe to Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator.